Andrew, I have a question for you.
Okay.
I actually have a lot of questions for you.
Okay.
Because this is the Ask Andrew Anything episode.
Ooh, I'm excited.
I can't wait.
I love to answer questions. I'm an open book. Did you get like lots of random stuff from lots of different people?
It's all over the place. There is no theme to this.
Wait. What is that on your finger?
Gosh, you have to let me show it off.
You got to show it off. It's episode 5, and this is the first episode. You are an engaged lady.
Engaged lady.
Congratulations. Manoli did great.
He did
If you're listening, man, I'm giving you a COVID high five through the screen. Absolutely killed the game. So congrats to you, the new engaged princess, so to speak.
I'm soon to be wed lady. Yeah, it's
I love
crazy.
it. What a whirlwind of life. Life be lifing.
This is not about me, though.
You're right. So this is the Ask Andrew Anything podcast, huh?
Ask Andrew Anything. And like I said, there's no theme to this episode. There's so many different topics. So we got them from like a nice little mix of like dietitians or soon to be dietitians, which is cool. We also got some from just like people that are nutrition nerds like us, but maybe not necessarily in the industry, so to speak. So sorry if I'm using this hand to talk a lot, you guys.
You got to pace yourself though. We're going to be here an hour, so like your wrist might get tired.
I'm going to get a great bicep workout after that.
I love it.
All right, sorry. Okay. So I think it would be apt to start with, people want to know your origin story.
Really?
People want to know, so not like the business, but like, this is personal. I hope you're okay answering personal questions.
You know I'm an open book. That's fun.
So start with your mother's maiden name and your security number.
Trying to pay for that wedding, aren't you? It's not going to work.
It was worth a shot. But tell us about like, what made you decide to become a dietitian? And like, did you always know you were going to be a dietitian? What's the deal?
Oh, that's fun.
How did Andrew become Andrew?
How did Andrew become Andrew? Oh, man. Well, 33 years ago at 4 p.m. in St. Joseph's Hospital in Baltimore, Maryland. No, we're not going to. Yeah, maybe a little too far. Let's fast forward a little bit.
Save that for your autobiography.
Yeah, I was going to say, we'll save that one for when I have my 40-year midlife crisis and write a book about myself to try and give back to kids in Africa or something. TBD. Stay tuned. Stay tuned, world. But anyway, so yeah, when I think back, nutrition was something that started for me in high school, actually. And it started with my own sort of personal health and nutrition journey. I had what we'll call a non-traditional family growing up, divorced household, split family, and some, fun drama and chaos that was sort of my upbringing. But in high school is when my life really started to stabilize. My dad and my stepmom really stepped up, and I started to get into sports. And I was a really skinny, scrawny kid in like elementary school. I went through a puberty phase like many do, where before I grew up, I grew out. But when I was growing out, I was in a home life that was encouraging a lot of grab by you can foods, a lot of snacking, a lot of munching, a lot of excess alongside some sedentary behavior. And so we'll say my out phase was a little bit more out than was probably necessary. And when I got into high school, I started to run. My parents encouraged me to get involved in sports. I started to run track and cross country, and I became runner Andrew. And my sophomore year in high school, I shot up, grew 5 inches in a summer, and I lost 40 pounds running cross country. I went from out to up, as a lot of teen boys do. And just as this, like I said, my out phase might have been a little more, my up phase was also a little more, So those extremes, they have a tendency to echo. So to all those parents out there worried about their 12-year-old boy that has a little bit extra, get him moving and make sure you're feeding him good stuff and encouraging a good relationship with food, because testosterone and muscle are about to kick in, and man, is that a great thing.
Yeah.
But I entered my phase of really fast runner, and my sophomore year, I ended up being a pretty competitive runner locally. That led to sort of an obsession with being lighter, which was disordered and created a little bit of a disordered eating, not in a clinical text. It was definitely subclinical. I never had to seek treatment, but I definitely had a very impaired relationship with food. And what's funny is my junior year, I passed out during a race and started getting heart palpitations, and they checked some of my blood values, and my triglycerides were 7.
Oh my
So
God.
I was the kid that fell in love with the incorrect ideal that fat makes you fat.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had developed that, right? That's that ideal that I was attached to, and it led to the behavior of restricting dietary fat to the extreme. I memorized, you know how my brain memorizes things? I memorized food labels as one of the first things I ever really learned how my brain worked. And I used to be able to walk down an aisle and I could tell you how many grams of fat were in every single food. It was disordered, right?
Yeah.
And so I passed out during a race and my triglyceride levels were through the floor and I was super thin. And that actually led to me understanding and then starting to learn about sports nutrition.
Mm.
And sports nutrition became my like fascination my junior and senior year in high school. Prior to all of this happening, I had always thought I wanted to go into care. I've always been a
Mm.
very people focused person. I'm a talker. I love to connect with humans. I do really care about others. And so I had intentions prior to this to go into medicine and be a doctor. And one of my first big idols or dreams was actually the one of the spokespersons for Kashi. Back in like 2005 or
Aw.
six, there was a dietitian. I don't even know if he was actually a dietitian, but he was a dietitian in their commercials. And his life was traveling the world to source the ingredients for the Kashi foods. And he was this like fit windsurfing bro that was talking
Aw.
about the different things and the,
This is Andrew
we're
in
in,
another life.
yeah. And so like young Andrew was like, oh, so like what's a dietitian? And I started to become interested in nutrition. And so that led to me then picking colleges based on an undergrad in nutrition. And my plan was I'm going to study nutrition and then I'm going to either go into business with it and start like a nutrition supplement or nutrition whole foods company,
Mm-hmm.
or I'm going to go to med school and become a doctor with a nutrition focus. And I picked Pitt because it was one of the top nutrition programs in the nation. I didn't really understand what a registered dietitian was at that point yet, but I
Yeah.
knew that I wanted to study nutrition and I knew that I wanted to somehow impact the world.
Mm-hmm.
A fun aside that you'll probably find hilarious. I don't actually know if you know this. I took a business marketing management class when I was 15 in high
What?
school, and my business proposal was for case specific nutrition.
No.
And it was a sports bar company that made sports specific nutrition bars. So, like a football bar and a soccer bar, and it was supposed to have the carb and protein
Wow.
ratios
Wait.
for the
Maybe you should
different
be
athletes.
quiet about this because maybe we'll actually do it
Maybe
one
we
day.
should. Maybe we should just to do it. But it's worth noting, case specific nutrition, the name, I came up with that at 15.
Wow.
And it had a different life and a different intention. But that idea of personalized nutrition was something that young me had crossed the finish line and passed out because of, and then turned around and became a very competitive athlete and became a mentor to his fellow runners by the time I was a senior and graduating. And so it's to say that case specific nutrition was founded in this experience.
Wow.
And the original thoughts of it, at least. So that's kind of a fun
so
fact you might
cool.
not have known.
I love that.
Yeah. So, our company name is from a 15-year-old. So, I don't know whether
Very
that's
bright 15-year-old.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. I appreciate that.
I'm so glad that you're sharing this because I think, first of all, a lot of men don't feel super comfortable or open talking about their relationship with food or with their bodies. And just you being super open about that, I hope makes other people feel more comfortable talking about it or seeking out like professional help for it. Because I have no doubt that whereas like you described it as like subclinical, like we see people like this all the time that, maybe are not, they don't have triglycerides of 9. They might not be passing out, but they're really struggling. And maybe nutrition or food is something that they're using as a coping mechanism to deal with other things in life. That's like such a normal like response, especially to some tough circumstances growing up.
Well said.
And so I'm really happy that you shared that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. It's fun to be able to say it openly. And like you said, that control that I was getting from that rigid eating. It might have, in this day and age, we probably would have diagnosed me with orthorexia, is likely where I would have landed on the spectrum. I had a summer where I definitely massively underate. That was the summer I shot up and leaned out like crazy. But beyond that, I really got obsessed with what my definition of quote unquote clean eating was, which was fat makes you fat. So I'm going to micromanage my dietary fats. And again, it kept me alive for a while because I would eat a lot of carbs with my running, and I ate enough protein as a result. But I definitely was becoming increasingly malnourished in other ways.
Oh, for sure.
And it's funny. So it's like you said, it's that definitely stemmed from wanting to feel in control during and after a phase in my life where I felt very out of control. And then that sort of fat-fearing Andrew, where I was obsessed with fats, became a fit-focused Andrew. Right when I passed out, it was obviously thankful it wasn't as bad, it wasn't worse. But it's to say that led to that curiosity of, wait, food is fitness. Food isn't, food is more than just something to restrict. It's something that I need. And like you said, that's the positive step in the journey. I will say that desire to fuel, but still had some cognitive dissonance to do, which is to say that I still had some ideals that lingered. I was still a bit fat apprehensive. That lasted really up into like sophomore, junior year of college.
Wow,
and that was in the nutrition program is when that really started to get debunked.
But
I will say from end of high school, where I thought nutrition was such an important thing, and it was an element of fueling, and it was an element of health and wellness. I went to college with aspirations to incorporate that into my vision of trying to help others. And as I got farther in my nutrition journey, I started to realize some of my own internal impaired relationships with food. And during my undergrad, started to challenge those. And what I can say is by the time I graduated, I had a very, very good relationship with food. And then I went and did my residency, my dietetic internship. And that just reinforced why that was so necessary. And then did my master's work. And obviously, as you know, have become well known as a behavior specialist and an eating disorder dietitian and a sports RD and, the person that deals with metabolic complexity. But it was an important chapter for me to learn my own lessons. And you can kind of hear, they always talk about how, the phase of mastery, right? You initially, it's that idea of you like learn a little bit and you have this disproportionate, you think you know so much more than you do. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. You know just enough to be dangerous. Well, that was like high school me. I had a basic enough comprehension of dietary fat that what I knew was dangerous to me. And then you kind of go through this dip, so to speak, in your knowledge before you receive that. And that journey for me was very real. And it was also very important to my process in becoming who I am. I'll note that through that, the other thing that was happening was my professional excavation, which is to say that I started to shadow physicians, and I hated the biomedical model of care. Like family practice, cardiology, endocrinology. I spent time in surgeries. I watched heart caths. Like I really was trying to figure out where I fit in medicine. And I hated how reactive everything was. And I didn't have the wording to describe that at the time. This was 19-year-old Andrew. But I knew that it didn't sit right for me. And then I kind of entered a phase where I started to explore the world of nutrition a bit more. And that's where the dietitian piece came up. But at that point, I had also started to realize that I was fairly astute in business. I had some natural tendencies that made me,
Wow.
I don't know that I had any business savvy noted until junior year of college is what I'd say.
Wow. I'm imagining like 5-year-old Andrew with like a franchise of lemonade stands. That's just what I envision.
Well, and to your point, it's funny because like a lot of that is true. And I'll put it this way. My dad made me pay for the cups on my lemonade stand so that I understood that businesses had expenses.
Aww.
And so like, I definitely was raised by a businessman who taught me business. I had to read books in the summers and write reports. And I read, Koch Industries' Science of Success. And so it's not to say I didn't have any business exposure, but I don't know that I realized my business potential.
I see.
And it was, I started working at GNC in college. And then that was the sales, the marketing, the pitching, the connection. I started to realize that I memorized things really fast, and I was pretty good at shaking hands and kissing babies, so to speak. And so I'd make customers, I'd build rapport. I did a lot of that very naturally. And then in the summer after my sophomore year, I studied abroad, and that really opened my horizons. It built a confidence in me that I didn't have. There was a lot of confidence issues that really helped me burst through. And then my junior year, we started the nutrition program. And I realized how much I loved nutrition. And it was just like, I just absolutely poured into it. And I got involved in the Pitt Fitness and Bodybuilding Club, and I was working at GNC, and my world really became nutrition. And then that summer, I had a really critical decision to make, because I had kind of gotten to a place where I knew I was good at business, and I didn't really love medicine like I thought I would. And so I started to explore the areas of nutrition and business. And I got 2 summer internships offered to me that year. And the first one was with Johns Hopkins Medical Research Group, and it was doing fatty acid research with Johns Hopkins, exploring the ketogenic diet in kids for seizures. I mean, some really cool cutting edge research. And then the other one was with the J.M. Smucker company, Smuckers.
Yeah.
And people like the jelly people? Yes. Little known fact, Smuckers is like a $30 billion company, and about 500 million of its jellies and jams. The other 29 billion is like a variety of things, but their main thing is coffee. They're a coffee company. They own Folgers and Millstone and Cafe Pilon and Cafe Bustelo. And
Knew I liked them.
The list goes on. So they're a coffee company. And I got offered what was called an industry and government affairs internship. And it was doing nutrition labeling and doing product development and doing R&D.
Wow,
and
that's cool.
It was a 5-section internship where I was going to learn about like government policy and FDA stuff. I was going to learn about nutrition labeling. I was going to learn about marketing. I was going to learn about the legal aspects, and I was going to learn about the R&D and P&D. And so I had these 2 opportunities, one of which was at a ridiculously prestigious university that would have set me up so that I could have gone, because at that point I thought I wanted to get a doctorate in biochemical nutrition. I started to realize how well my brain, I mean, I was that biochem patho nerd. That's just, my brain just soaked it up like a sponge. So it was like, you go to Johns Hopkins for an internship, name a biochemical PhD program and you're going to get into it. Or go explore this business side of nutrition. And because it had a bunch of options, I chose that one. And I will never be more thankful I did that.
It's amazing. Because, it's like literally like it was training for what you do now. Like you learned so many different facets of the business.
Exactly. It really let me see, that summer, for example, one of my projects was they worked with the National Coffee Association, and there was all these awful news reports that were coming out about coffee, like coffee causes heart attack, and they were like pulled random parsed data that was factually incorrect.
Which still happens all the time, by the way.
All the time. But that's when this was really ramping up. And the National Coffee Association, which was Smucker and Starbucks and McDonald's and a couple of other big coffee groups, were coming together to say, like, how do we respond to this? And so they had pulled in a Harvard doctor, and he had a jump drive of over 1,500 coffee studies. And I spent 6 weeks reviewing and analyzing the coffee studies and building a database of coffee research with levels of evidence criteria, synopses, recommendations, keynotes, this giant database. So whenever they had CNN come out with some breaking news BS to try and enhance viewership, they could go and scroll, search the study, and then give my feedback. And that was an example of something that I got to do at 20 years old. Insane. And it was life-changing. Like, I got to work with these big names. I got to learn about like real research. And so it really did. It changed me in a big way. And it also boosted my business confidence. I definitely made some waves there. I had some great mentors there, and they showed interest in me working there full-time after I graduated. And so I left there, one, knowing I wanted to come back the next summer, but also going, man, maybe I am a business person. And so that path led me into my senior year, where I knew I was going to go to Smucker again and do sort of a different version of the internship. They wanted me more as a nutrition labeling analyst then, which is when I got to work with their dietitian team, which that group of people were like my first really big group of business mentors that definitely challenged me and helped me build my confidence, what I'd say, because I always came off as very confident, but I was one of those people that I was loud when I had lack of confidence, and I was loud to compensate, right? And so they were the people that helped me start the process of replacing that fake confidence with real confidence. And a lot of the experiences there really did help me feel like I did have something to give, I did have something to provide. And I was coming out of senior year, and I was at a place where I knew I was going to go into business in some way. And I sat down with Judy Dodd, who you know very well.
Judy.
Judy, we love you.
She's like the first dietitian.
She was first basically. She's mentored so many, and she was one of my mentors. She did a really good job of protecting me because she recognized my business side, and she said openly, like, you're more business focused. And she was one that encouraged me to start looking for internships like that. And when we finished, she basically said, you're going to go into business. You becoming an RD would be a great thing, but don't don't lose sight of where you're going.
Yeah.
And so I only applied to one dietetic internship.
Wow.
And it was basically, if I don't get this one, I'm not going to become an RD. I'm just going to go straight into business.
Wow.
And that was Adagio. And Adagio was much like my first internship at Smucker. It was 13 sites with a business focus. And so I got to go in and see myself in a variety of places. And that was really exciting to me. And it's so funny because I interned at Smucker that summer after senior year. And then I started the Adagio internship. And I went into the Adagio internship planning to either start working at Smucker after I graduated and then get a master's in something while I worked. Or I was also doing some interning at GNC in their R&D group. And I was thinking maybe I would stay in Pittsburgh and do an R&D job there. But I was basically in that like regulatory or R&D side of food and supplement industry. That was kind of where my brain thought I was going to start my career and cut my teeth. And then I'd get my master's and make my money. And then I'd start Case Specific Nutrition, the supplement company, right?
The grand plan.
And of all places, I got placed at the WIC, the Women, Infants, Children's Office in Butler, Pennsylvania, as a 21-year-old male to do their breastfeeding counseling as a part of my rotation.
Seems appropriate.
And yeah, exactly. And I thought I was going to hate it. I thought it was just going to be so uncomfortable. And I thought that I wasn't going to connect with the people because in my mind at that time, like we were probably came from different philosophies in life is what I'll say. You know, there was definitely some political judgment, I'll put it that way. And I couldn't have been more wrong. I loved it. The first time I helped a 16-year-old who was pregnant feel at ease about her breastfeeding experience with her child. And the first time I helped figure out that a 3-year-old was morbidly obese because they were drinking 64 ounces of apple juice a day instead of water. And I was giving these people seemingly small, but from a ripple perspective, extremely impactful nudges in care. That's when I realized I loved counseling because I had loved counseling in every rotation, but that specific one, it hit me in the face. And
so sweet.
This is a really long answer to your question, but hopefully it's relevant to who's listening. The same time that rotation happened, I was in an interview for a GNC position in their product development. And I was one of the 2 finalists. And the last interview was with their chief innovation officer. And their chief innovation officer was on the top floor of GNC headquarters, and he had this big office with the one side was a whiteboard. And he says, "Come in." And the first thing he says to me when I walk in is he goes, "Define mean, median, and mode on the whiteboard." And then he proceeds to grill you for about 10 minutes on nutritional biochemistry and all sorts of stuff.
Wow.
And I just was, doing my best. And he says, "Last question." So, yeah, he goes, "What are you doing in my office and not enrolled in the master's program?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to get my master's while I work," which coming from a middle-class family that was debt-fearing, I had paid, my dad and I had worked hard to pay for my undergrad. I worked 30 hours a week during school. I did summer jobs. He contributed how he could. I had paid for my dietetic internship myself. And so I had no debt going into this because I'm busting my butt, right? And so I didn't want to take on debt in a master's. And everyone in my world at that time was like, "Oh, that's a great idea. You've got such a great plan." And he goes, "That doesn't make any sense. Come sit down." And what I thought was supposed to be the interview for the job that I was, the start of my dream job, which was to work my way up in supplement R&D, was this like mentor father-son moment from a man that had no need to do it, but I'm so grateful he did. And he, again, brilliant person, medical doctor, dentist, multiple master's degrees, like an absolutely just powerhouse of intelligence. And he said, "I've never had anyone come in and actually get all of those questions right. And your mind is one of our minds that needs to have a master's degree. You're doing us a disservice by not seeking education when your mind clearly craves it."
Wow.
And I said, "Well, I just don't want to go into debt." And he goes, "That's not a reason to skip the master's degree." And he said, "I'm going to recommend you for the position. But to be honest, I think that this position's a starting position. I think you'd be bored. And I hope that if they offer it to you, you don't take it. And I'll make you a deal. If you still want to work here after you get your master's, reach out to me and I'll make you a position myself."
Wow.
And
Incredible.
it was one of the most, I mean, and I thank you, Guru, first of all. You know, I hope you don't mind I said your name, but it's, I walked out of that. I had thought that I was this young, ready for the workforce person. And that conversation was sort of bittersweet because on one hand, this man gave me some of the best compliments I had ever received. But on the other hand, he had completely deflated my path.
Yeah, shattered your expectations of the future, I bet.
And it was sort of this what now, you know? And what's funny though is I left that and I went home and I sat through it and thought through it. I talked with Allison about it. And I reached out to Smucker and said, I want to get a master's degree. You just acquired True Roots Nutrition and Sahale. So I know you're going to need some extra nutrition labeling help.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in a temp position if you need the help while I figure out what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
And they agreed. And I graduated from Adagio on a Friday with $120 in my bank account left. And I started at Smucker on Monday as a 6-month temp position. And in that 6 months, I got accepted into Pitt's Wellness and Human Performance Masters. I started Case Specific Nutrition, the counseling firm, because I decided while I'm in school, I've got to find a way to make some money. So I might as well, I'm a dietitian, I might as well start offering meal plans.
Mm-hmm.
I met our COO, Rob.
Oh, Rob. Shout out, Rob.
He was finishing he was coming off his sophomore year at Slippery Rock and was working the front desk at the gym I lifted at while I was in Ohio. He was my first client once I got my little LLC started, and I helped him with his bodybuilding show. And I started the Daily Whey protein line that summer. So I got accepted in the program. I started counseling at a local gym in Ohio. I built up my cash stores to pay for the first semester of my master's. And I gave myself a little nest egg so that I had enough to live off of for a year, which was $800 a month. So enough to live off of is a relative claim, but it's to say I gave myself, I had $10,000.
We won't say what year this was.
Yeah, this was 2014, and I also was very much a minimalist 21-year-old. So let's keep all of those things in mind.
I remember you having holes in your gloves.
Yes, it took me a while to unlearn the budget that I had in college. Because like I said, I mean, my dad helped me as much as he could, but really I paid for my room and board and I covered a big chunk of my tuition. Like I really had a lot of that on me, which is great. And again, that's not a criticism. Like middle-class families work hard to help their kids. And my dad, one thing he did that I will always be thankful for is he instilled the work ethic of God into me.
Yeah.
And so like,
you're gritty.
I did. The amount of money I made in high school to prepare for college and the amount of money I made in college to keep myself afloat. And then also my willingness to live on $800 a month for all of college. You know, $40 a week in food. There was a lot of canned tuna and pasta with medley blend. That combo was my meals 2 to 3 times a day for years. And I still can't eat canned tuna to this day. Not a fan. But I had saved up enough from that 6 months at Smucker to pay for my first semester and to have $800 a month to live off of. And I had started this little company. And I remember saying to my dad that fall before I came back, this was the fall of 2013, I'm either going to get some great experience while I get my master's, or I'm going to start my career. Mm-hmm. And I came back in January of 2014 and I started the Wellness and Human Performance Masters. And I had a little barrage of virtual clients from Ohio that I brought with me. And I had, and these were all cash people. And Rob went back to Slippery Rock and started to spread my reputation as the local, bro dietitian. Yeah. And I started to get my college people. And then I got local Pitt people and I started networking at the gyms and doing that. And then the college bros, their girlfriends came to me. And then their girlfriends' sisters. And then their girlfriends' moms. And then their husbands. And then you start to realize how many people really wanted this. And I started to just kind of work my way through, right? Shaking hands and kissing babies. And I made enough the first 6 to 8 months to offset and pay for my second semester of school. Wow. And then I basically was able to consolidate my master's into 3 semesters because I was already an RD. So I had no prereq. So I moved the classes around and I took extra classes in 3 semesters, which one saved me 1 semester of tuition, which is no small feat. And 2, worked in my advantage because the company grew so much that I had to hire contractors at the end of the first year. And so I took 2 semesters of school, took a semester off, hired some contractors, opened a second office, started to do some things, and then finished my master's at the end of 2015. And so I came out of 2015 with a master's in wellness and human performance and 2 contractors and an employee and 2 offices. And I had learned to bill insurance. And 2014 was the first year that dietitians could bill insurance without a referral for obesity. And I had luckily met with one of the reps for one of our local provider groups that explained it all to me before her job was permanently removed. And so I then had this information that no one else had. And I proceeded to I was also the crazy person willing to stay up till 2 or 3 at night, manually doing billing and claims and submitting it myself and doing all that stuff. But I finished college with a business that was paying me very well and had increasing demand. And that was all built off of the offer to go get your master's degree and let me know if you want a job on the other side from that interview.
Shout out to that guy, because it almost seems like Case Specific was like this thing that you kind of started in an interim just to make some money, and then poof,
you realized the need. And what happened, there were so many things that converged. Was my realization of my love of counseling through the WIC and through all the other counseling means, the realization of what my business acumen could do, and then the confidence in my abilities finally ignited by, it's funny, you should seek self-validation. You should seek approval of self. Most of us don't start there. Most of us benefit from some external validation. The goal is that you use it to help prove some things that get you at a good place. And ideally, if you're seeking external validation, it's about the deep things about you that matter. Not how much money you make, not what car you drive. But for example, I identify as a giver, as a lover, as someone who's curious, as someone who wants to go first. And so those core values that make me me are things that I initially probably needed to see proof of concept externally before I was ready to accept them internally. And that's my journey. Some people start with internal validation. I was not blessed with that. I've been blessed in so many other ways. I think you would probably say the same.
Wish that was me, but no.
Us people pleasers, right? That's one of the things is we please others as a way to seek validation for ourselves as a core tendency. And that's something that as you get more competent and then as a result of competency become more confident, right? That's self-worth cycle. As it continues to churn and gain momentum, the hope is that you're able to then start to identify some internal validation. But the experiences at Smucker with all of these bright people that saw something in me, right? My dad coming to lunch on one of my last days, and the 2 Smucker brothers CEOs surprised me at my lunch. I was the only intern that they were there for, and they came up and shook my dad's hand and said, "We expect big things from your son." Those moments, right? They will always be catalysts to me saying, "Oh my God, what do you know? Maybe I am smart enough. Maybe I am special enough. Maybe I do have what it takes. Maybe." I will say that gurus, having the chief innovation officer of a supplement company that as big as GNC tell me that my brain was worthy of a master's degree made me feel so intelligent that I felt like I should pursue intelligence. And it's those moments you look back on and go, I understand why at that phase of my life I needed the external validation. I'm thankful it was there because it led me on a path to, one, pursue something that's made such an impact in the world thus far. And also it led me to a path to pursue a connection with myself where I now have the confidence and competence to drive forward from internal means, not from external, look at me, look at me, look at me.
Totally. This is such a good story. I love to hear that, I think it's so relatable too that we need to see ourselves reflected in other people. And so him seeing this thing in you, it's like maybe you were at that time where you're like a lawyer, building evidence for the person that you were going to become.
Yes.
And that was just that little push that you needed.
Those were those pieces. And so that's the main story. It was really, throughout that, I explored business, I explored medicine, I explored research, and I found a lot of strengths and skills along the way. I found a lot of insights. And by the time it was all said and done, I realized that business was the thing that I could do that would allow me to continue to skill build those things, but also skill build them on my time. That was one of the other things I realized is I was a very effective time manager. I was someone that went 1,000,000 miles an hour, but I managed my schedule better than anybody. And as a result, I tended to be willing to outwork people both in pace and in duration.
Mhm.
And it became very clear to me that that's not a bad skill for my own thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so I was that person that was willing, like I said,
Self-starter.
up at 3 a.m. looking up Highmark and codes, in their portal, self-teaching and running estimate claims to see how they work and like taking notes. And, that was the origins of what is now our franchise handbook.
Totally.
Is like a lot of the stuff that I was willing to self-teach while doing a master's and eating cans of tuna. There's a willingness.
Thank you for your service with the tuna. Because
yep, I always say I will never claim brilliance, but I will claim willingness, and that's why. Is a lot of what I did was me. This wasn't. It's funny because on one hand, yes, I knew nutrition was a part of my future at 15 years old, but the things that have evolved along the way, I had to be willing to continue to learn and explore and all of that, and I definitely had to be willing to like put the effort in. And so it's, while a lot of people say like you always knew what you wanted to do, and it's like within some level of confinement, there was some creative constraint of nutrition, but that's still so broad. And I kind of hit all the corners of nutrition in my exploration of who I was and what I was about and what I was trying to accomplish.
It's so cool to like see all the groundwork laid like along the way. Like the story makes perfect sense when we look at it in reverse, but I bet that 15-year-old version of you obviously knew you had a passion for nutrition, but didn't know that it was going to take you here.
No, absolutely not. I had no idea. I didn't have any crystal ball that said, even when I started the private practice, it was worst case scenario. It's something that's cool on my resume, and
make a little money while
I'm in school, a little bit of a better cash value because I had been getting paid such low minimum wage rates and things for years. And I was like, I need to figure out a way to make more money in less time. So I had started that sort of time opportunity thing. And I'm lucky that I figured that out at 22, not 62, obviously. But it was, the other side was, well, best case scenario, I start my career. And the comment was, in that time, my vision of career was me as the Michael Jordan of nutrition, right? Was the dietitian. I was, I was going to be the dietitian, so to speak, right? That was that vision at that time. So I wasn't mature enough at that point. I hadn't saved myself, which meant I had no ability to fathom saving others. And so said differently, I hadn't parented or mentored myself, which means I had no ability to parent or mentor others. And so my initial vision of Case Specific was me as a successful private practice owner, not me as the leader of a small becoming middle-sized private practice entity with dozens and dozens of dietitians and thousands of patients. I had to grow into that. That kid had the curiosity, then the willingness, and this guy here still has the curiosity and the willingness. And I've failed a lot, and I've smiled a lot, and I've tried a lot. And 10 years later, you see what happens,
That's awesome. Oh my gosh. I feel like I have follow-up questions, but I think some of them might lead into each other.
I was going to say, take this where you'd like. I love that.
I'm just like imagining like the young dietitian to be, or maybe someone who's considering like a career switch to a dietitian. These were actually kind of based on some of the questions that we got. Do you have any advice for a newly graduating dietitian? One of the questions was actually like, hey, do I really need clinical experience before I'm able to go do something else in the field as a dietitian? Or like just any advice you have for like new dietitians in general, dietitians to be?
So what I'll say out loud there is I think that the general rule of like you need to start with clinical, I think that's a little outdated. Clinical was our bread and butter as a profession for a long time. And it's always going to be a need. We have great value in that setting, but it's to say that there are so many other dietitian careers now that clinical is not relevant to, that it's important to get clinical experience is if you have aspirations of being a clinical dietitian. So what I'd say out loud is clarity of your path is probably a better sub question. So if someone said, should I get clinical experience? It's, well, how clear are you on your other paths? And if the answer is, I have no idea what I want to do, then like probably, because there's going to be massive job security in clinical experience because, we'll just use a number, but 50% of the job opportunities are clinical. Now it used to be 90%. And so we've got to recognize that. When I graduated,
it was like 70% of dietitians working clinical. I have no idea what
I don't know what it is now either, but it's shrinking by comparison as all the other jobs that I just mentioned. I did in my master's, I did research with Carnegie Mellon on hydration. I did, again, the industry and government affairs, regulatory compliance stuff, the legal stuff, the R&D stuff. I mean, there's so many careers out there for dietitians now that it depends on what you want to do. If you want to be a private practice dietitian, then no, clinical experience isn't really going to help you because it doesn't help you build rapport. It doesn't help you engage and use motivational interviewing. It is a quick, reactive, acute response, which is great. It's important, but it's not useful in the private practice setting.
Yeah.
If you're going to go into research, it's not going to hurt, but it's also maybe not going to be particularly helpful unless the thing you're researching is something you did clinically. If you're going to go into business and go into R&D or go into some, spokesperson type stuff, are you going into a business that sells clinical supplements? If so, it might be helpful. And so I think there's sort of that contingency of what are you actually trying to do?
Yeah.
What I'd encourage any RD to do is, one, try things, get experiences, because that's the thing I did. I hope you can hear across my little soliloquy about my journey, was that between my actual internships and then my dietetic internships, I collected dozens of experiences. Plus I worked at GNC. Plus I worked in a hospital as a food service aide in high school, as a random side note. I had collected so many experiences that I had a really good reference that helped me understand where I was interested. So I think that's important. And then I think the other thing I'll say is, it depends on where you're at with your professional voice. Some kids come out of school and they don't have their voice yet. And what I mean by that is they have a lot of knowledge, but they haven't learned how to communicate that knowledge in bullet points and bite-sized. It's such a skill. And the only way to do it is through it. It's to do it. And what's funny, working at GNC in college is what did that for me. I was usually the only person in a store, and I was doing it 30 hours a week, and I'd see 30 to 70 people a day where I would talk to them about nutrition and supplements and their lifestyle. And so you got to a point where it was like, I had done it so much by the time I graduated, right? So I had my voice. Not to mention, I've always been a very good extempore. I've been a strong speaker. To your point, when you talk about 5-year-old Andrew, I definitely was the kid that talked to strangers. Like, my mom would tell stories of me at 2 or 3 years old sitting in the cart in the grocery store, striking up a conversation with someone in the cereal aisle. Like, I've always been that no icebreaker needed guy.
It reminds me of, you told me a story about your mom telling you about how you would explain the different dinosaurs to just people that for sure didn't ask.
Weren't interested in knowing about the dinosaurs. Yeah, absolutely. I definitely, I had to learn. So in finding my voice, I had to learn to become more concise and when to shut the F up, right? I didn't need to learn to open my mouth. I needed to learn to close my mouth. And that is a work in progress to this day. But it's to say that that's where a good example for me is me coming out of college. I had a voice. I was ready. And as dietitians, when you finish a master's degree and an undergraduate degree and a residency, if you have imposter syndrome, I understand, but you have knowledge that can help massive amounts to masses of people. And so I knew I had good knowledge, and I went out there with a genuine intention to, with that knowledge, help somebody move their life an inch forward for the better. So I had the right intention, I had confidence in my knowledge, and I was very skilled at articulation even then. And so it made a whole heck of a lot of sense for me to go straight into private practice. Some dietitians are gonna wanna cut their teeth and get their voice. A clinical setting may not actually be the best place to do that, but an outpatient setting might be.
You're so right. And I remember I asked you that question, like, hey, should I get some clinical experience before I decide to make this career move? I always knew I was interested in private practice and also in just speaking to a larger audience. And you gave me that really good advice, which was like, hey, it depends on what you want to do, but knowing what I know about you, I don't think so. And I have to give a huge shout out to Pitt and Pitt's master's program, because the one thing it did provide was a really strong clinical foundation, which of course I use that clinical. Hold on, Apollo's coming.
Apollo's coming to say hi.
Yes, I know.
He just got up from his nap.
You can sit behind my laptop, that's okay.
He's gonna paw. I think he thinks it's treat time. Apollo, I need you to lay down. You're a good boy. We love you, but you gotta lay down. But like you said, Pitt, shout out to them, because it set you up so well. And there's a reason why we have so many PIT employees.
Yeah.
They come out and they're
so
ready.
knowledgeable and confident. And I have to say that's what like a strong clinical internship, like that residency sort of program that we go through, really helped me build confidence in terms of, I know that if I can care for the sickest of the sick, that I can help people that are much less. Oh, here we go. You're gonna knock my drink? I can help people that are in a much less acute situation, but hopefully have a more profound impact on them, like throughout the course of their life. So
absolutely,
again, I would totally resonate with what you say. It really depends on what you're interested in. And if you're not totally sure, it's not a bad idea to get a good clinical foundation to just be able to then build upon that and leverage that knowledge to then find your voice. But you're right. Like, and I hear that from some of our dietitians when they first come on in a counseling. Okay.
You're going to come join us
on the couch. I don't know if you can see him on camera, but he's just chilling.
Couch vibes.
But some of our newer dietitians that come on and they start counseling, there maybe is a little bit of imposter syndrome, a little bit of like, can I really do this? And it takes practice.
Yeah, you got to get your reps in.
You're going to explain a concept to someone out loud for the first time. You understand it, but saying it out loud, you're going to get to gauge their level of understanding, and you're going to be able to iterate from there. But like with everything, you have to start somewhere. And so I think cutting your teeth in what you actually want to do is probably the best route, right?
Well, and it's funny to think about, like when we think about you. So like, how did you find your voice? Well, one, you were a leader in your sorority. And then 2, you were a leader in student dietetics. And then 3, you were an intern for Case Specific and ran the social media from your, senior year on?
Yeah.
And so you were 3 years into parsing down nutrition knowledge for digestible 140 character sound bites. So you start to realize you came out of school a great speaker, a great leader, and also with like very good rehearsed marketing, which, to be fair, like I always joke, like I'm just a wellness salesman, because that's really what it is. Like I make lifestyle sound sexy. And it's because I've got my little bullet points, just like the used car salesman, where I can make you think that it's such a deal and a steal. And those are rehearsed. And you did the same thing. Your little 140, character sound bites that you did over the years were good practice in consolidating and making concise messaging that's attractive, that resonates, that lands. And so you came out of college very ready to scream from the rooftops. And so to all the people listening, where you're at in having your voice is probably a good tell of where you might want to start. But the only way to get better is to get your reps in. And so find a good place to get the reps in, talking about the information you're interested in talking about. And so if clinical nutrition intervention is something you're interested in talking about, then like sign on with an FES mindset and get those reps in. But if you're under this delusion that you have to do clinical before you can leave clinical forever, that is absolutely a falsehood. There are so many job opportunities in the world of dietetics now that you can never do clinical and always be fine. But it goes back to the clarity of what you want to do and how you want to make a dent in the universe.
Totally. Well, let me ask another, I guess, kind of in the same vein. I was going to switch things up and ask some more just like straight up nutrition questions, but I kind of like this career route we're going down. So I have a lot of people ask questions about like, hey, I don't know if actually going through all the hoops, which we know there are a lot of them, to become a dietitian, but I'm really interested and fascinated in nutrition. I want to make a dent in that universe. Do I need to become a dietitian, or is there some other way I could make an impact through nutrition and help people?
Nutrition is definitely in its 15 minutes, which means we are now getting a variety of nutrition education platforms. And so I think there's definitely something to be said about digging into that a bit. What I'll say out loud is dietitians and CNSs, right? Certified Nutrition Specialists, those 2 credentials are the only ones that licensure is available for. And licensure means that you are basically there's a standardized approval of practice at the government level. And that means that you are eligible to be submitted to insurance. So we are, as dietitians and CNSs, we are medical specialists. There is no other credential than those 2 that is nutrition education based that allows you to be a medical specialist and seek insurance reimbursement. What does that allow us to do? Well, in my opinion, and this is where I may deviate in my opinion from other dietitians and CNSs out there, is I believe that that means that we are meant to be the most complex in terms of capability, right? We should be able to see the most difficult patients. We should be able to leverage the most resources. We are the person that the Rubik's Cubes get sent to.
Yeah.
And,
to like interpret the like scientific evidence too for the general public. I think that that's another thing we're really good at.
And just like you have an MD that has a PA and an NP underneath them, so that the simple cases of a wart can be dealt with while the MD deals with some strange skin lesion that they don't know what it is yet. I hope that the dietitians and CNSs are the nutrition practitioners that are sent the toughest of the tough, which leaves room for health coaches as a conversation to help with the core philosophies. And my hope is that that would be a systematic view, right? Not a competitive view, which is, to say it out loud, free me up from the "are you drinking your water" check-ins so that I can deal with someone who's trying to process complex digestive abnormalities. So in my vision of it, yes, there are, they don't allow insurance coverage, but the concept of health coaching is very much a growing field. And what you're going to see over the next few years is, you're already seeing insurance companies. Apollo's just being a big needy boy. You're seeing insurance companies, and they're starting to offer health coaching as like kind of a subset business, right? It's you can work for an insurance company. It's a corporate wellness feature. So there's already jobs for health coaches. In the world of health coaches, the ACSM, the American College of Sports Medicine, their credentials are going to be the most rigorous. Eventually, there's a likely reality where they start to standardize what a health coach's education is. Right now, there is no standardization, which is why it's not a licensable profession. If I had a crystal ball, that ACSM, I forget the acronym. I think it's a functional nutrition specialist, and FNS is what I think it is. But it's to say that the ACSM is likely one of the few to actually get that credentialing in the future. So I do think we're in a phase where we're going to very much see a place for health coaches as a part of an overarching care. But what I'd warn you of is right now in the current landscape, you are sacrificing a lot by not becoming an RD or a CNS. There is scope of practice, there is licensure, and there is a level of understanding that allows you to deal with very complex patients, which is really important. And that's going back to that Dunning-Kruger effect that we've talked about. A lot of people get these nutrition credentials because they spent a weekend at a seminar and they know just enough to be dangerous.
You're so right.
And that's the thing that I'd be very critical of. And so it's to say, and this is a good example, is like Lane Norton is a nutritionist. Well, he has like a freaking doctorate in biochemical nutrition science. He's been a student of nutrition research for 20 years. He's arguably one of the most knowledgeable minds about nutrition on this planet.
And he's not an RD.
He's a health coach. And so like, I hate to tell you, bro, but your weekend seminar ain't cutting it. You better be committed. You better bring your best foot forward, because I will go after those that aren't going to actually have good scope of practice, good understanding of their value. So the best intentions can land improperly. And there's a bigger debate to be had there in terms of, the validity of license and all of those types of things that we don't need to go down the rabbit hole of today. But I would note that if you're a personal trainer, or you're a therapist or physical therapist, or some other ancillary practitioner, that's smart. If you're some other ancillary practitioner that wants to be better rehearsed in nutrition so that you can at least address it, and then you have a line that you know to cross where you're going to refer, then by all means seek those. But if you have a vision of becoming a nutrition professional, you shouldn't be shortcutting the education, sitting there and saying, can I get like less than 2 years of education and do this? It's like,
and still get the same level of value and provide the same level of value.
Yes, and that's the problem, right? It's like, so if it's so you can speak to it as a part of your overarching vision, great. But if your vision is to be a nutrition professional, suck it up and go hard. Because you're entering a competitive market of passionate people that study this like crazy. And if you want to set yourself apart, you starting with shortcuts isn't a good sign. And I'm not trying to be ignorant to financial need and considerations, because I understand that. But it's also to say, if it's truly your passion, find a way to make it profitable.
Invest in it, right? Yeah.
And so there's definitely kind of a little bit of a tough love comment at the
Yeah.
end of that, for sure.
And I've had therapists and personal trainers and stuff that I've talked with, and they are always very conscientious of, I don't mean to step on your toes. You know, we did kind of talk about nutrition with this patient or client, and just kind of discuss the basics. And
Yeah.
I'm like, all for it. I love it. I love that you're reinforcing some of this stuff as long as we're on the same page.
Correct.
You know, I love that you're reinforcing some of the things that I'm talking about. There's no world where someone like a therapist or even a personal trainer can't do some of that motivational interviewing that's required to help people make healthy lifestyle changes. Yeah. You don't necessarily need a master's degree and 1,200 hours and an exam to do that.
Yep.
That said, you're right. Like, I think you can get to a point where you're just enough to be dangerous, or you know just enough to be dangerous. And I think about that even just like with my own personal training. I loved when you were sharing about your origin story, when you got like really into the sports nutrition and you were like kind of like, you know, eliminating all these fats. You thought you were like perfectly optimized, right? It was like kind of like that orthorexic.
That first iteration, yeah. I'm so clean. Right. I'm eating all the right fuel. Right. And it's like, and you pass out.
Yeah. And I see so many people, especially in like the healthcare field, that have an interest in wellness and nutrition. They are interested. I love the interest, but they don't always get it exactly right.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the things I love educating people about is like, hey, when you actually understand nutrition on a more fundamental level, you will have a better relationship with food. You will realize that rigidity that you are pursuing in like clean or perfect eating, it just doesn't exist. There's so much nuance.
Yeah.
And so I love that, you know, we can encourage people to like speak to nutrition in a more general sense, but really leave it to the professionals. And if it's something that you're passionate about, like go all in. Don't try to take those shortcuts.
Don't shortcut it. A shortcut is never a good way to start because it means that you're likely going to continue to look for shortcuts. I like to think of collaborative care as a Venn diagram, right? It's not a set of bricks stacked next to each other. It's a group of people with slightly overlapping. Yeah. So just like you said with the therapist, they're going to address nutrition because they need to understand the person's relationship with food. Yeah. We're going to address behaviors because we need to understand the person's relationship with themselves. Yeah. And so like, you know, dietitians are oftentimes called eating therapists because we definitely go into there. Now, the key is when you think of the wellness Venn diagram that is collaborative care, there's some overlap, but there's also a point at which you refer. Yeah. And to your point, the therapist you mentioned, they have the stuff they'll talk about and then the stuff that they say, well, that's for Devon. Right, that's for the dietitian. Yeah.
And like, the same is true for us. I'm still happy to listen, but like, let's make sure that you're following up the stuff with your therapist or with your dietitian.
And that's where even for when I think about me, like I'm probably in our company at least, I'm probably the one that pushes the edges of our scope of practice the most, right? All of our dietitian, I'm definitely the one that experiments with personal coaching, health coaching, mindset coaching. I definitely do a lot of different fun stuff for people. And that's my role, right? The CEO, I'm supposed to, pave the new paths forward and trial and error stuff and give feedback. And it allows me to feel my way forward for our company's growth and also the impact of our patient base. But it's to note that I still have very hard and clear boundaries of when it's time to refer. Yeah. And like, even when you look at a lot of our policies, like we order labs and a lot of dietitians can't do that. We order them. We also don't use them to diagnose people, but we use them to be a more effective, proactive asset to collaborative care.
Say, hey, I think you should see an endocrinologist, or I think you should see a gastro.
And then send them to the gastro and the endo with the labs so that endo doesn't have to then see them 3 months later, order labs, see them 6 weeks later to review labs. They just show up in appointment 1, they have data. That is us helping a reactive system that's broken and takes too long be more proactive. So that's an example of like, are we doing something that's out of our traditional scope? Sure. Are we stomping on other people's scope? By no means. We are being an asset to the collaborative Venn diagram. And so I think to those of you that are listening that are want to accelerate or increase your knowledge of nutrition, ask yourself, is this going to be so that I can contribute to the Venn diagram? And if so, great, get the education, know where you end and where dietetics or dietitians or nutrition practitioners begin. If your goal is to be the nutrition person, ask yourself what level of nutrition you plan to speak to. And the comment I'll make there is that you are entering a world of very competitive, highly educated nutrition professionals. And so skimping is not the solution. Totally. And as someone that's been very debt-fearing in my life and has circumnavigated debt as an educational means. All I can say is that I ended up having to do the thing anyway.
Yeah.
And so sometimes it becomes the way to suck it up and do it. And that's funny. That's that GNC mentor that was, provided me with the opportunity to change my perspective. He said, suck up the debt and do it. And in the face of ridiculous interest rates and massive loan debt, I would also caution people to be very considerate about taking debt. I don't think you just take loans to take loans, but if you have good clarity of what you're trying to do and what you want to do with it, or a good passion that you want to move forward, then it's worth that conversation.
Yeah, and a means of making that investment worthwhile.
Yep, absolutely.
Some rapid fire ones.
Ooh, rapid fire. Okay, maybe I should drink some coffee.
Diet Coke, yes or no?
Ooh, yes.
Yes? Okay.
Absolutely.
Cool. So it's not awful for us.
Cancer water. No. Someone's going to pull that out of this and then post that, and I'm going to go viral for the first time calling Coke cancer water. No, it's not. It's funny. There's so many different angles of this that we could go into.
Yep.
But when we think about diet sodas, one of the things that's come out recently is, diet soda is more correlated with obesity and diabetes than regular soda. So you should just drink the regular soda. You need to understand correlation. And so correlation isn't causation, right? So when we're trying to investigate how things impact things, there's a concept of correlation, which means two things seem to interact, but we don't understand how they interact. And so what you have to look for is, are they causative, as in one causes the other, or do they have a shared intermediary known as a confounding factor? In the world of diet soda and its correlation to diabetes and obesity, who's most likely to drink diet drinks?
People with diabetes and people that are obese.
Yes. So did the diet soda cause the obesity or the diabetes, or did the obesity diagnosis encourage the diet soda consumption? That's the key there. And that's the most recent studies, is when you actually look at some of that like news media that's come out, a lot of the attack on diets, drinks, it's one, that it's correlated with those problems, which it is, because the people that are suffering from those problems are encouraged to use them. And then the other one is the artificial sweetener comments.
Does it give us cancer?
Yes. And I will say that, one, it's very, very short-sighted to lump all artificial sweeteners together because they're very different. The amount of clients that say to me, wait, you're okay with Splenda? And yes. And the amount of time I've drawn the molecule of Splenda on a Post-it note, because what Splenda is, I'm super
more
nerdy.
in-depth practitioner than I.
Hey, that's probably, I think you're probably where you need to be, right? These are definitely, remember when I had to work on being concise? These are the lessons we learned. I may not draw these molecules anymore, but I may have done that at 25 years old. So, but it's to say, for podcast sake, Splenda is a sucrose molecule, which is a hexane ring, a 6-chain, with a ribose ring, a 5-chain, and that is sucrose. That is table sugar. And on the third carbon of the ribose, right, they have an alcohol, an OH, and what they do is they chlorinate it. So they bombard it with chlorine. Side note, table salt, which is NaCl, is 55% chlorine. Chlorine is chloride, I should say, is one of the most common things that are part of your electrolytes in your blood. You have more chloride than you do sodium and potassium. It stabilizes acid-base balances and is essential. So it's not a toxin. Let's just put that out there. Because they're going to go, wait, that's the thing that's in pools. Yes, chlorine is in a lot of things, but it's also in our bodies. And so let me tell you, you're not drinking pool water. Let's not even go down that rabbit hole. It's to say that they chlorinate it. And all that happens is that hexane ribose combo, the OH gets replaced with chlorine. But what that does is very important. It renders it indigestible. And the reason that's important is Splenda then goes through your body without absorbing. It doesn't get broken down and it doesn't absorb. The reason that's important is the studies that were done on saccharin and aspartame, which are equal and sweet and low. Those both have metabolites, which is to say when we consume them, they break down. And some of those metabolites are graded as carcinogenic, which means they are correlated with cancer at high dosages.
At the same level, I think, as like hot dogs.
Yes, absolutely. And it's worth noting that to your point,
in terms of ranking carcinogens.
Yes, we're talking minor carcinogens. We're talking not super life-changing. We're also talking a dose question, which is the rat studies that were done. I mean, yeah, if you want to eat a dump truckload of aspartame, then like it might be a conversation, but like you have to eat your body weight almost every day to go in alignment with some of these studies, metabolically speaking.
Which is why we love the randomized controlled trials of human studies.
I can tell you've been listening to Lane Norton. Randomized controlled trials. That's one of his favorite things. But it's to say that aspartame and saccharin have the metabolites that cause the concern. I understand it. Mm-hmm. It is still a little bit overkill, but I get the metabolite concern. Splenda doesn't even have that. It doesn't metabolize. It goes straight through your body. And so we go, okay, it's a sugar molecule that's been chlorinated. It's indigestible, so there's no metabolites and there's no absorption. What are you freaking out about? The only arguable negative is that because it resembles sugar, in some studies at high doses, it's been shown to spike insulin about 8%, which means if you consume too much of it, your insulin can spike and that can cause your blood sugar to crash. So at high doses, you could potentially get a low blood sugar from it.
Which is like the same as like not eating for a few hours, and
it's not a reason to not consume it.
Right.
Yeah. Now, I did have a client years ago that came in with reactive hypoglycemia, and I was ready to talk to him about small frequent meals, protein and vegetables to stabilize and slow digestion, all the reactive hypoglycemia intervention, and he was already doing all of it. And I'm grasping at straws, and I'm like, well, like how much fluid do you drink a day? And he's like, oh, I drink a lot. I'm drinking tea all day. And I was like, what kind of tea? He's like, unsweetened. And I said, how much a day? He goes, I don't know, 100, 110 ounces. And I said, what are you putting in the tea? And he goes, oh, dude, I love Splenda. And I was like, well, how many packets a day do you think you consume? He goes, 24, 26. And I went, oh.
We found our solution.
Yeah. I said, no more than 6 a day. And he emailed me 3 days later and said, oh my God, it's been the Splenda the whole time. So that is the only thing I can say that Splenda has quote unquote done. And it was not from moderation, it was from abuse. And so the diet sodas get lumped into they cause obesity. No, they don't. They're correlated with it because people that are weight conscious or blood sugar conscious tend to use those products. So it's chicken before the egg in that instance, or it's cancer causing. The more modern Coke Zeros and a lot of the newer Coke products, they use Splenda. It is not. And even if they do use the aspartame, it is not. Now, I will say the only thing that's worth noting is artificial sweeteners are much sweeter than sugar. And so Diet Coke will be the sweetest thing you consume, which means when you eat a blueberry, if you're a Diet Coke consumer and I am not, the blueberry will taste sweeter to me than it will to you.
Yeah.
Now, that's a frequency conversation. Do you drink 6 Diet Cokes a day? Because if so, your tongue is saturated with that sweetness and you are going to taste everything else as subpar.
Yeah.
But are you somebody that on Friday night when you go out for pizza with the family, you drink a Diet Coke? Yeah. And so if you use it sparingly and recreationally, or if you have one a day with your lunch and it's the fun, sweet thing, you're not likely to see yourself, quote unquote, because that's the other thing is people oversimplify that by saying, oh, it makes you crave sweeter things. No, technically what it does is it saturates the receptors on your tongue and it makes other things seem less sweet. Yeah. So then to find something that appeals or appeases the tongue, you have to use non-natural sweet things, which is candy and desserts. So it doesn't make you crave them. It makes those the only thing sweet enough. But once again, there's a dose dependency there. If you're drinking one a day or less, we're fine. And the comment I'd ask is, are you someone that thinks fruit is sweet tasting? If so, great, move forward. If not, maybe you need to play around with how sweet everything is in your life.
Yep.
That doesn't mean elimination and it doesn't mean bastardization or incrimination. It just means, hey, let's maybe reduce the frequency and quantity a little bit and add some other things instead.
Totally. And that wasn't super rapid fire, I'll say. But
the question was, the response was not. I never said I was concise.
But I'll say this is a nod to that thing that we called nuance. There's nuance to things. Hence why it's helpful to have a nutrition professional, because they will explain this nerdy stuff to you. So you can't get an easy yes or no because there's nuance. Something I will tell my clients about the diet soda situation too is like, I understand that you're very concerned about the artificial sweeteners. I'm probably a little bit more concerned about how much caffeine are you getting from these things, because that's
it adds up. It sneaks up and adds up.
Yes, we're not thinking about the caffeine that's in those things. I just want you to be thinking about that from a heart standpoint, from a sleep standpoint, and all of those things.
A nervous system, sympathetic nervous system standpoint.
That's one thing to consider. And then when it comes to other artificial sweeteners like sugar alcohols, one thing to consider is this isn't going to kill you, but pulling water into your digestive tract is something that those sugar alcohols do.
A little bubbly.
Because it is trying to create an equal concentration gradient.
Yep.
And so when you're pulling water into your digestive tract, you might have a little bit of discomfort.
Yep.
And if you want more information about what I'm talking about, you can search the sugar-free Haribo gummy bears reviews. They're hilarious.
Oh my God, I love that.
You're going to have some digestive discomfort, but other than that, you will be fine. Just something to think about. That's all.
Sometimes that reminded me, that made me think of some of the benefits of the Google algorithm. So Google has that predictive search,
Yes.
right? Where when you type the search in, it'll start to guess.
Yep.
And it guesses based on other people's most commonly searched things. And that's a fun litmus test. One of my favorite ones of all time, back when Nutrisystem was popular.
Oh, boy.
People would go, what are your thoughts on Nutrisystem? And I'd go, type in, does Nutrisystem make? Just in Google, and then see what it says. And the top 10 were like, does it make you gassy? Does it make you poop? Does it make you constipated? Does it make you fart? Does it make you ill? Does it make you sick? And I was like, just going to say that if like the first 7 are horrific gastrointestinal distress, probably not a lifestyle change.
You can guess what's going to happen.
Thanks, Google. They did my job for me on that one.
Let's see. Okay, so I'm going to pick and choose some of my favorites. Why is it that I can eat gluten? This is something a lot of my clients, I can eat gluten abroad, like in Europe or in Italy, but I can't tolerate it when I'm in the US. Why is that?
They're different strains. So this is kind of fun. A way to think about it is proteins, so gluten is a protein, right? So that, as an example, proteins have little flags on them that basically identify what they are. And our body uses those flags as messengers to understand how to interact with it. And different wheat strains have different flags. And so if we want to imagine the little gluten in Italy has a little Italian flag, right? And so you eat that nice baguette. You like this visualization? Good. The little Italian flag comes into the body, and the body knows what to do with it. It says, okay, great, that's food. We have gotten to a place where the strains in our local food supply don't seem to communicate quite as well, is a simplified way to say it. And at times will trigger our immune system to think it's a foreign invader. And so when the little American gluten flags come in, the body goes, we're under attack. And that is what we can look at as like a celiac disease, where it attacks the small intestine locally. Even certain gluten sensitivities, that is, a less severe response, but it's still an immune response. And then a gluten allergy, which is not the same as celiac. So celiac's the autoimmune, which is your immune system attacks your cells as a mistake. A gluten allergy is your immune system is basically evoked unnecessarily by a protein. And then a gluten sensitivity is local cells are evoked. All 3 are an immune response. One is far more catastrophic than the others, unless the gluten allergy has anaphylaxis involved, in which case now we're talking about, levels of trauma. But all of those, it's the core comment of our immune system looks at that flag and gets the wrong information from said flag. And so that is a result of the separation of strains. That is the result of our growing practices and our alterations of it. And then also there's some argument of our hyperexposure to it. And this is an area where a lot of research, there's not the core data where we can explain what we call biologically plausible mechanisms, which is, said simply, things that could make sense, but none of them have been like indisputably proven.
Yeah, that's a big distinction.
That's a big distinction. So I'm talking now about speculative science as a way to say it. But the thought would be, one of the big arguments is that we have this weird tendency in our society to build what are called frankenfoods, right? Which is we take the starch from a potato, the protein from wheat, and then the fats from soy, and we combine those to make something containing carbs, fat, and protein. And then we act surprised that we feed it to our body, and our body goes, what is that? Where like if it was the soy or the corn or the wheat, the body's like, corn, wheat, soy. But like, and this is, again, I'm obviously oversimplifying the chemistry of this, but hopefully this is a good visual, which is to say we have built things, and a lot of our packaged products, you'll read the back, and when you realize that that a lot of our foods contain all of those ingredients combined together in a way that may not be well distinguishable by our immune system that regulates the foreign bodies coming in.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the stronger biologically plausible explanations.
Mm-hmm.
And what I'll comment on is that is the origin of some of the eat whole foods, some of those movements
Mm-hmm.
and that kind of thing. That's definitely where our use your baseline of quality foods and then make those things the moderation. But we can see where diets that contain mostly that stuff, that could be very plausible.
Yeah.
But it's to note that we don't know that for sure yet,
Mm-hmm.
but that is one of the things about our food that is different from most other countries.
Mm-hmm.
We have a tendency to pull things apart into their unique individual components and then combine them with other things, and then we act surprised, our body's not sure what to do with it.
To make them perfectly
palatable, enjoyable, flavorful. It's food science taken to an extreme. That's why I jokingly call it Frankenfood, because it's science. You know, Frankenstein was a science project, but it was a science project gone wrong.
Yep.
And
it's not going to give you cancer or kill you, probably.
No.
It's just, you know.
And the solution is not to become anti-wheat, anti-soy, anti-potato in that example either, because that's where people are like, soy is bad. It's like, well, not necessarily. There's nuance to that. Wheat is bad. You know, there's a conversation to be had. But yes, we can definitely see that some people, and it becomes a surprising minority, where the minority starts to become a robust semi-majority, are not tolerating those things. But the things we want to factor in there are other confounding variables. And going back to complete elimination is not likely the need. But if you look at your diet and those things are the dominant things you consume, then there's definitely a more likely conversation to be had. And so what you do with that information is very valuable.
Totally. Well, I vote for a part 2.
Okay. I like that a lot.
What do you think?
Yeah. How many
questions? But what do you think? Maybe we do one more?
Why don't we do one more?
Let's do one more.
Does that get you kind of to a halfway point on your list?
Yeah.
Let's do that. And then that'll give us a chance. If anybody else starts thinking about questions, we can bombard you. So I like it.
Okay, this one's going to be a mindset question, because I know you love talking mindset.
You know I do. Mindset Mondays and Thoughtful Thursday. We even got the rot for Rotful Thursday.
Rotful Thursday. He's chasing bunnies. I saw him kicking in his sleep.
Yeah, he's twitching. He's definitely he's dreaming those big dreams that only a Rottweiler can dream.
Okay, so what is your thought process for the days when you really don't feel like it? This is like straight up verbatim what I got.
So for the days that I don't feel like it, what does my mind do with those days, those down days?
How do we navigate those days when we just like motivation's at a -5?
Oh, I love that. That has evolved for me.
Okay.
That has changed over the years. And what I'll say is that my new methodology, I'm not going to criticize my old one, but there were pros and cons to it. And so I'll talk about how I used to do it, and I'll talk about how I do it now. And I think you could argue there are potential pros and cons to both. And I also will say, depending on what you're pursuing in your life, there may be pros and cons to both. So when I was in my 80 to 100 hour work week grind fest, I had what I called a TFB approach. Too fucking bad. Get over it, get after it. That was the baseline. Didn't matter. And so if I struggled with motivation, I would leave the space I was in. And so, and Allison can attest to this, that meant long nights at this office. I'd come down to Baum Boulevard and I wouldn't be allowed to leave until I got it done. And sometimes that'd be 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock. I'd get a call at 11:30 at night. Hey, you coming home? No, I'm just getting started. Like that's what that was. Did it build the baseline that allowed this company to be what it is now? Absolutely. Did it create no work-life balance, a boundaryless human with massive anxiety and panic attacks? Yes, it did. And so I won't discredit the TFB approach, but I will also note that there are definite pros and cons to it, and you need to know the poison you're drinking. It's kind of like a lot of the energy drinks out there, like gives you energy, but is that really what you need right now? You know? So on those days, that was it. It was just kind of what I'd call the grit and willpower. But the comment is, it's like, well, what happened when you didn't have the grit or willpower? Well, I would remove myself from the place that didn't give me it, was basically. And that's a subtle thing. It's kind of like that idea of you're not motivated to go to the gym. Too bad, go to the gym. We don't have to talk about what you're going to do at the gym, but go there. And I would do that. When I would be demotivated, I would just go to the gym and I might lay on the yoga mat and stretch for 30 minutes. And then you get to a point where you're like, I'm not going to waste my time while I'm here. And so you would just do something. And so that's actually a pretty like cool little piece of advice, is change your environment so that you can refocus or set yourself up to participate in the thing.
Yeah, or like basically like the whole like just promise yourself that you'll go to the gym.
Yes, exactly.
Even if it's only like a 5 to 15-minute workout, like just promise yourself that you'll go there. Make no promises about what you'll do once you get there, but just promise yourself that.
Yes. And so you basically take something that feels insurmountable and you cut it into small pieces. And so if the idea is, oh, I'm too exhausted to get a workout out right now, great, don't get a workout and just go to the gym. So all you're doing is driving to the gym. Still feel overwhelming? Okay, go change your clothes. Like, you break it down into the smallest quantifiable pieces. That is very good information to have. Because most of the time, the action potential is too big. And so you cut it in half. You make it easier to get started. You set yourself up. And like I said, I had a tendency to temptation bundle myself to this office, and I just wouldn't leave until I had finished something. And I would do what I'd call off the grid time, where my phone would be turned off. I would have no other tabs open. I was not allowed distractions. The only thing I could do was pee and work. And that's how I wrote a blog a week my first year. That's how I learned to code and build our first website. That's how I networked and met 10 new people a week the first year that was my goal every week. As I built, the OptiLife Academy, and as I built all these other ancillary services, it's how I got all of those off of the ground. It worked. It was very effective. And I'd argue, if you want big things, sometimes it takes big commitment like that. And
expectations.
And not all expectations are bad. Like I said, as an older me, I'll say that the TFB is still on the decision tree, but it's a little farther down. That used to be the decision tree. It was too bad, go do it.
There was no other gear.
I'm a big fan now of a couple things. One, recognizing that all feelings are some attempt at your brain communicating with you. And so if I have a day where I'm just not feeling it, the first thing I do is sit down and figure out why. And that's a conversation with me. Hey, you seem to be procrastinating this, or you seem to be avoiding this or evading this. You've rescheduled doing this 3 times now. What's going on with this? Why are you resisting this so much? What don't you want to do? What don't you like? What's frustrating you, right? That can be very revealing. And there's a concept called the 5 whys, which is ask why to yourself 5 times. Well, I just don't really want to do it. Okay, why? Honestly, I don't like writing things down. That's why. And you just dig until you really get to the core reason of why you're avoiding something. I'm trying to think if I can think of something recently that happened with, that I've been sort of resisting.
Well, I could think of a handful.
And to be fair, if you want to share one, feel free. But
there was like a consulting project that was like, it involved menu generation, and it was like, very specific requirements for what could be on this menu and the nutrition parameters. And I realized the reason I was procrastinating it was because I didn't exactly know how to execute it while meeting all that criteria. And so it was like, I was avoiding it because if it was something I could have done without thinking, I would have just done it. But because I was uncomfortable with the feeling of not really knowing how to do something, that was what was causing that procrastination.
Perfect. I love that as an example. So let's roll with that. That's a complexity issue. So going back to the action potential of it, a way to think about it is you were biting off too much, more than you could chew, in that your vision of that first meeting with yourself had too high of expectations. And so to roll that back.
I was convinced that I was going to do it all in one sitting. I just needed to find the time to do it.
And those are high expectations. That's the equivalent of, I'm going to clean my entire house today. And it's like, why don't you start with making your bed? There's a big difference. And so a way to say about the advice I would have given you in that moment is, the first meeting is just to think about the topic. We just did that with our social media manager today, right? Before we did this, we had a meeting that the point of the meeting was to start the thought process, was to give us permission to brainstorm. And so that goes back to that TFB approach led me to the realization that I needed to cut it in half and make it easier. That is where, if you sit with it and go, why am I struggling with motivation? What's behind this? Complexity is usually the number one reason why. And then the other one is an unrealistic overambition, where you think the amount you are supposed to get done in the first iteration is way more.
Mm-hmm.
And so the comment there is, if that was my excavation, I'd go, oh, that means you need to cut it in half and reschedule it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would be that example is, great, let's make it simpler. What's the starting point? You know, a way to think about it was when we started brainstorming season 4 of the podcast.
Mm-hmm.
The first meeting for me had to be a reflection of the previous podcasts. Before I could think about episodes, before I could think about topics,
Mm-hmm.
I did, actually, this is a really good one. I procrastinated my meeting with myself about the podcast because my note, when I block it on my schedule, and then I dump notes in that block that are basically meant to be prompts for me to start thinking. They're meant to stimulate my thought. Well, the prompt was too complex. It was too much stuff. It was, you need to walk out of this meeting with like the technical aspects, the content aspects, the schedule. You need to have reached out to the people. And my brain was just like, I can't do all that.
Yeah.
And so it was like,
well, you've got a lot on your plate. Of course, you'd want to batch all that stuff together, but still, it was
exactly
making the barrier to entry too high.
So you break it into pieces. And so that'd be the first thing, is I'd encourage people to, if their body or brain is resisting something, listen to why. A lot of times it's complexity.
Yeah.
A lot of times it can also just be straight up burnout.
Yeah.
It can be the fact that you need a rest. And the comment I'll make is that, yes, there is a grind, there is a consistency, there is a persistence to any content creation, but there's also creating room to recharge, to leverage creativity. You are not your most creative self in a slugfest of a 16-hour workday, just like you are not your fastest self in mile 20 of a marathon, right? Sometimes you got to stop, catch your breath, and then work on speed. Yeah. And so that's the other piece I'd say, is if it's not complexity, it may be that it actually is time for you to take a break. It is time for you to step back. And there's intentional ways to do that. And so sometimes that's actually when I go, why am I avoiding this? It may be because I have too many things on my plate competing and this just isn't as important. Yeah. Or I have too many things on my plate and this is a creative meeting and I don't have the creativity. Well, if it's that one, then I'm going to schedule it at a time when I'm more creative. That's why my content creation meetings are Mondays from 9 to 11 a.m. They're my most creative time, as opposed to Fridays at 3 p.m. Yeah. When I'm going to be my least creative. And so sometimes when you ask yourself, why are you resisting? Instead of beating yourself up for resisting, understand why you're resisting and then fix the problem. Totally. A lot of times it's going to be that, again, it's either you got too much going on, which means it's time to prune the rose bush, consolidate your focus to a couple things that matter. For that, I would say use the 4 Ds. You either do it, or you delegate it, or you defer it, or you ditch it.
We've had this conversation many a time.
And that's an important one, because if you are sitting there going, hey, it's not that I don't have the creativity for it, or I don't have the ability to put the creativity towards it. It's not that it's too complex. It's that right now I'm doing so many things that it's not more important than 5 other things, and the 5 other things take all the time. Well, then you have to say, you're either going to do it, which in that case you're not. Can you delegate it? If so, who can you delegate it to? And then if not, are you going to defer it? Put it on your schedule in 3 months to think about. And if you've got time then make that time. And then what I always say is the rule of thumb on the ditch, reserve that for the hard nose or the 3-time defers. If you've deferred something 3 times, strike 3, you're out. It's not that important. Yeah. And if it is that important, you'll think of it again, I promise. Right? And so I'm a big fan of, it's, again, sit with that question, ask it, find the root of it. Sometimes it's going to lead you to prune the rose bush and really make sure you're putting your energy in the most important projects. Sometimes it's going to lead to you breaking that thing into pieces so that the bites are more palatable so that you can chew it and swallow it and actually get it done. And sometimes you're going to find out that you just don't want to do it. And then if it's something that is imperative, then you need to excavate that further. Go back into the 5 whys. Well, why is that? Yeah. Like, we're talking about business stuff, but what about like going to the gym? Well, that might, for example, be like, well, maybe you don't love a gym routine. Maybe you love an exercise routine, right? Maybe it's the summer and you feel stupid going and spending 2 hours in a building with air conditioning when you could be out on your bike. Okay, well, maybe you need to like get rid of the guilt and shame associated with not going to the gym and realize that the goal is movement. Yeah. And so sometimes asking the whys, oh, hello, good sir, allows you to excavate that. But those would be some of the pieces. And what I will say is, from that decision tree, once you've explored the concepts of complexity, explored the all of those other branches, there is a time when you just say TFB. It's time. Suck it up, buttercup.
Totally.
Let's do it. Everyone needs to have that on their list, because good things don't come from tepid aspirations. Good things come from, it's going to suck sometimes.
Yeah.
Everything great is going to suck sometimes.
Totally.
And it doesn't mean it should always suck, but it's going to suck sometimes. And I can't change that. I can change your attitude about it. I can make sure the fact that you embrace the suck, that's not a bad thing. But there is a TFB sort of whispered down the lane, if you will.
Well, to your point, that project, I just TFB'd it. I woke up, I think it was like 4 a.m., 5 a.m. on a Sunday. And when I'd usually be working out, I just did it.
Yeah.
And it was just no drama. I was just like, this is just going to happen. And I'm going to just embrace it. And then I'll have the rest of my day.
Just make it happen.
And I feel like the theme with that, what I guess your response was like, let's be curious, not critical, which is something that I totally learned from you. And I say to my clients all the time, instead of beating yourself over the head for not doing whatever it is that you know that you should or want to be doing, but can't find the motivation to do, just be a little bit curious about like why, why is that not happening?
Where's the resistance?
Like with me this time around with the marathon training, I'm running the marathon on Sunday. So shout out, by the time this airs, it will have already happened. But during my training, I was just like, I just didn't have it. And I really had to do some exploring as to why. So like first I realized, this is my 4th marathon in less than 2 years. And I had totally overtrained myself, not just this marathon cycle, but multiple cycles in a row.
A little bit of runner's burnout, physically and mentally.
Yeah. And then like, secondly, I was just like not as excited about that. And like to take on something as challenging as a marathon, it should be something that you're really excited for. And I realized that I had just signed up to run a marathon because I just was like, yep, that's just what I do.
It's just what you do.
Yeah.
You were autopiloting it.
And so that was like a valuable lesson, right? But it took some time to be curious about what was going on and not critical. Like, oh, you're just such a lazy piece of whatever.
Yeah, you start to beat yourself up too much.
Yeah.
I love that visual too. You see it all the time. I think we might have even shared a version of it. I was going to say tag you're it for petting the Rottweiler, but it's that visual of like there's the different cups, and it's like consistency isn't 100%, 100%, 100%, 100%. It's 140, 60, 70, 190, and recognizing that every day you have a different amount to give.
Yeah.
And even Michael Phelps recognized that, right? One of my favorite things he used to say at the end of every race in the interview, he said, I know I gave it the best I had today.
Oh my goodness.
Apollo, big boy. Nope, go lay down. Hey, go lay down.
Sorry guys, we got a coffee spill here.
We got a coffee spill. We'll clean it up in a bit. But first,
He's just got a big butt. He doesn't...
Apollo, sit. Good boy, stay. But Michael Phelps used to say, I gave it the best I had today. And he was very aware of the fact that different days had different levels of performance capacity. Totally. And that is very true. So sometimes it's recognizing that you don't have the motivated, crazy high. So like temper your expectations of outcome. And that is where a lot of times it's just recognizing, okay, the project I wanted to get done today, maybe I shouldn't get the whole project done. Maybe part 1 of 5 needs to get done.
Yeah.
And that's where that goes back to that, breaking it down into pieces, but then celebrating the fact that you got it done.
Yep.
There's little hacks like that. And it's funny because that starts to feel like the TFB, but really what you've done is you've just reduced it so that it's very palatable and you're still making progress. You're just not making constant. And I remind people all the time, you're not a machine. Right? You are a living, breathing creature with a mood and emotions and ups and downs and a lot of things going on in your life. You're not always going to have...
You don't have the same level of output every single day.
It's just not. No one does. And that's okay. So it's embracing the fact that you're going to consistently progress, but the consistency is going to be a little bit choppy looking. Totally. And then also having some good mechanisms to kind of coordinate and, encourage things forward, essentially.
I love it. That's something I like adopted with the marathon thing. I used to think, oh, I want to PR, I want to do this, I want to hit under, sub, whatever. And now it's just like, I'm just going to show up and do the best that I have that day and just trust my training. Yep. No coffee for you, sir.
No coffee. No coffee for the Rottweiler.
Well, I think that's where we are.
I was going to say, I think this Roddy needs a walk, and it sounds like we've got a good stopping point.
Yeah.
So those were great questions. Can't wait to film a part 2.
Can't wait for part 2, but yeah, stay tuned. Stay tuned.
I love it.
Man's getting restless.
Yeah.
Ooh, that was great. I love the